Ephesus. It was a booming city, a thriving, busy city, very affluent city. And Paul helped launch a church there. He found a few believers, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit. And that group of 11 or 12 believers in Jesus went on over the next 2 years to change the city. They saw many people coming to faith in Jesus and changing their lives and accepting that gospel message. And so much so that it was affecting those who were idol carvers and salesmen of idols in the city, and they grew angry that so many people were turning to faith in Jesus and leaving behind the life of idolatry there in Ephesus, that it was affecting their business. And so they actually got so angry it turned into a riot on one occasion, and they accused Paul of being the mastermind troublemaker. He was arrested, and here he writes this letter to the church in Ephesus from jail. And so the main themes throughout the book, as we're looking at this time, is keep growing and keep going. And so let's read verse 12 of chapter 3. We'll read verses 12 and 13 together, and we're going to look at, number one, our approach, how we can approach God. In verse 12, he says, "In him," that's Jesus, "and through faith in him, we may approach God with freedom and with confidence. I ask you, therefore, do not be discouraged because of my sufferings for you, which are your glory." We may approach God. That is an astounding thought. I think some of us that grew up around faith and we've heard these things for so long, we lose the gravity of the immensity of that truth that we can approach God. And how can we approach God as we talk about our approach? First of all, he says, with freedom. The Greek word, as he wrote it in Greek, he spoke Greek, was parrhesia. And it literally means freedom of speech or boldness. You can speak with God freely, as you are. As I was studying it, I was reminded of an occasion I had with my father when I was in junior high school, 6th grade. I had transferred school districts from 5th to 6th grade. I didn't know anybody, and I didn't fit in. I was getting picked on at school. I was getting picked on the bus. And one of my teachers I was really intimidated by, and he was kind of an angry guy, and he had said mean things to me. And I had just grown angry and uptight, and I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell anyone about it, but I was just getting upset. And my father noticed a change in my demeanor, and he said, "I need to talk to you. What is going on? I see that you're angry, that you're uptight, you're not yourself. Are things going okay at school?" And they weren't going okay, but I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to open up. And I just started having some tears roll down my eyes. I felt that choking feeling in my throat. But I said, "I don't want to talk about it." He said, "Son, you need to tell me what's going on. I'm your dad. I love you. You need to talk to me." I said, I don't want to talk about it. I'm just angry, but I don't want to talk about it." And he said this to me. I couldn't believe my ears when he said this. He said, "You can tell me anything. You can even curse if you want to. But you need to tell me what's going on." This coming from a man who I had never heard curse. In my house, I'm not exaggerating, I would get spanked for saying fart instead of pass gas. We were very strict. And he told me, "Just tell me what's in your heart, son. You can even curse if you want to." And that moment just blew me away. And for a second, I thought, which word do I want to use? Because I'm not usually allowed to do this. And I actually couldn't bring myself to do it. But when he said that, I realized I have complete freedom just to pour out my heart before this man. And I'm not going to get repercussions for telling him how I feel, no matter what I say. I have complete freedom. And in that freedom, I just said, "I'm just so stinking mad." That's the worst I could come up with. Because when I told him how kids were picking on me at school, kids were picking on me at the bus, and they had this teacher who had been really mean to me. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be real. I just had to be honest. I just had to open and let it all out. That's what my father wanted me to do. Paul says you can approach God with freedom of speech and boldness. Have a real relationship with him. David took God up on that offer a number of times. In Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, David said, "Search me, know my heart, test me, know my anxious thoughts." And then he said, "See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of the everlasting." There were times where David said, "I hate my enemies with a perfect hatred. I wish their children would die." I mean, he was just angry and just pouring his heart out. But he approached God in freedom, and then he would say, "God, if any of this is out of line, get my heart back in line with you." There's a real relationship there, a real freedom there. The second word he uses to describe how we can approach God Number one was freedom. Number two is with confidence. The Greek word here means trust, or an interactive access in persuasion. That's kind of a loaded statement. An interactive access in persuasion. Simply put, what you say matters. That God listens. And there were occasions, I recall, especially with Moses, where they would have a conversation and God would actually change the course of plan based on that conversation. In other words, God hears us and what we say matters to God. You can speak freely with God and what you say makes a difference. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, the Hebrew writer says, "Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace at our time of need." Approach God with freedom. Approach Him with confidence. In verse 13 we read it, he says, "And don't be discouraged because of my sufferings, which are for you. They are for your glory." Don't be discouraged. Discouragement in Greek, ekekeo, and it means a negative influence from an inner weariness. In other words, we are internally, in our heart, in our soul, in our spirit, just worn down, and it's affecting us physically. That's that word, discouragement. And I think we can all identify with feeling just worn out in our heart, just worn out emotionally, worn out spiritually. He's saying, don't be discouraged. Don't feel worn down in your inner being because of these sufferings. Paul had the right to feel worn out. He had lost his freedom. That could certainly bring inner weariness. His future was uncertain. That could bring inner weariness. Paul was separated from the people he loved the most. That could certainly wear someone down. And we can all identify with those feelings. Maybe you've had an occasion where you've lost your freedom. Maybe your future at some points in your life was very much uncertain. Maybe you've been separated from loved ones and you feel out of sorts. You feel out of place and it's wearing you down. Paul says, don't be discouraged. And he's going to give the antidote to that in a moment. But the church in Ephesus, why would they be discouraged? They had lost the person with whom they were depending upon. They depended upon Paul. He was their leader, and now he's gone. And maybe you can identify with that. Someone you had depended on or felt like you needed to lead you, and now, for whatever reason, they're not able to do that. That can cause inner weariness. And the people in Ephesus, they had some fear of persecution, that things were not easy for the church in that day, in that culture. But we've all faced challenging times at certain points in our lives. I'm sure we can all identify with feeling worn down internally. At the end of verse 13, his answer to that is, look at the glory. Paul sees his suffering as an opportunity to show their value. He says the glory, the doxa in Greek, and it means to be heavy on the scale. We have our sufferings, and on the other side of the scale is the glory, and the glory will outweigh the suffering. And that word doxa means inherent and intrinsic worth. That there is an inherent and intrinsic value in each one of us. Paul could have renounced his faith long ago when persecution started. He could have left the city. He could have been free from everything. But Jesus was more glorious. Seeing his friends in the church of Ephesus keep growing and keep going was more glorious to Paul than his own freedom and his own comfort. On the scale, which had more glory? My comfort or seeing my people grow, seeing them thrive, showing them their value? This has more weight on this side of the scale, the glory. Hardships and even tragedy are major opportunities to show true glory, aren't they? To show true value and worth. Inherent, intrinsic worth to someone when they are struggling or when we are struggling together. Heroes are often made in times of hardship. And I see Paul in this case just embracing the hardship. Saying, I see this as difficult. I'm losing my comforts. I'm losing my freedom. I'm taken away from my people. Yet I'm embracing it as an opportunity to show you how much I love you. To show you your inherent, intrinsic value. I don't like it when my kids get sick. And if you raise kids, you probably had difficult nights where the stomach flu is in full gear and it's just not pretty and it's difficult and you have work the next day and you have things going on. I don't like it when my kids are sick. But my wife and I, we like the thought that we can take time to show them their worth. We've had times, as you have, where we need to take a day off here or cancel some things there. We maybe need to stay up through the night with them or get a poor night's sleep to be near them when they're afraid they might throw up again. Just this past Monday, Jasmine had the stomach flu Sunday night. She wanted one of us to stay up there with her, and I volunteered for that. And I told her at night when she was starting to fall asleep, and she's like, do you think it'll happen again? Do you think I'll get sick again? She was really nervous about that. And I told her, you know, Jazz, I hate to see you sick, but I love the chance to get to show you how much I love you. And then my eyes started tearing up, and her big brown eyes lit up, and she had a big smile, and she said, Dad, I think you're about to cry. Like she's been waiting for me to cry. I told her, Jazz, I love canceling things to show you that you're more important. Right? Suffering gives us the opportunity to show someone's glory, to show their inherent, intrinsic worth. Dad, you're tearing up. That was her response. I tear up often. I don't cry very much, but I tear up probably on a regular basis, daily basis, I'd say. But her sickness gave me that opportunity to set things aside that were less important and show her her inherent, intrinsic worth. When you have the chance to care for an elderly person, when you're struggling in your own health, yet you continue serving your family, when you back down from a job or make some decisions to put other people in your life first, maybe when you're in a hospital bed struggling in your own health to an intense degree, but you continue to show kindness and joy and hope to the hospital staff. You know what you're doing? You're showing the glory of God. You're showing an inherent, intrinsic worth that is heavier on the scale than your own comfort and your own suffering. On the scale, the weight of our suffering can be less than the weight of the glory with which we bless others and we bless the heart of God. So instead of suffering inner weariness and allowing it to wear ourselves down, let's try our best to be inspired by the opportunity to show glory. It's not easy, but it's certainly glorious. With your family, with your community, with God. Live for glory instead of comfort. Many times you can only choose one or the other. Am I going to live to show them the glory of God, the love of God, their own glory, their own intrinsic, inherent worth and value by doing something that is uncomfortable for me or difficult for me? Always choose glory over comfort. Physically, it may lead you to a place where you're worn out, but your heart can come alive as you're just bestowing the glory of God onto others. How do we do this? How do we overcome discouragement and focus on the doxa, or the glory? What are some practical steps that we can take? Actually, as we read on in verses 14 through 19, Paul prays, and I think in that prayer we actually see some very practical steps that we can take. So let's talk about Roman numeral 2, the application. Let's read verses 14 through 19. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. And that's right where we suffer discouragement, right? Verse 17. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with the Lord's holy people, that's us together, to grasp how wide, how long, how deep is the love of Christ, and to know his love, which surpasses all knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all of the fullness of God. So how do we apply this principle of glory, overcoming suffering? Number one, what did Paul say he did? He said, I kneel. And I just picked this one out because this is something that's been so great for me. It's been such a help for me to kneel. It sounds so simple to kneel at the church or to kneel at a chair. And if you can't physically kneel because you're unable, sit in an area where you are just laying your life down before the Lord. It's a physical response to an inner weariness. There's nothing magical about kneeling before God, but it does show humility and it does show reverence, which I know for me and many who grew up in this culture, those are foreign ideas. The idea that we kneel before somebody or we give reverence to somebody. I mean, in some places the leader is everything, and here in America we tend to just tell our leaders exactly what they need to do or else, right? I mean, the idea of kneeling before someone is different for us. But to kneel before God in humility and reverence, it puts things in proper perspective. There's a higher authority presiding over my life. There's a higher authority presiding over my circumstance. And as I kneel here, I'm anchoring down and dedicating time to seeking God. I'm stopping, dedicating time to placing this that's wearing me down into the hands of God. Because when I'm kneeling, I can no longer fight in my own strength. I'm calling on God's strength. When I kneel with that inner weariness or that heaviness, I can stay there until I need to, until I can get up feeling free and feeling encouraged. I know that's something I've done when I feel like things are weighing on me or wearing me down or things are out of my control. I'll just get down on my knees by my bed, or sometimes right here in this very sanctuary in the middle of a week, and I'll just get on my knees and put my head down, and I'll just say, God, I can't deal with this. This is too much. It's wearing me out. And it may take 2 minutes, may take 30 seconds, may take 10 or a half hour, I don't know. But I can kneel before God and allow God to put things in perspective as I place them in His hands and allow Him to carry them. Secondly, he says, pray for strength from the power of God's Spirit. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was in his circumstance, I would be saying, pray that I get out of here. Pray that I get some decent food. Pray that I can get some clean water. Right? I'd be saying, pray that I get my freedom, but that someone comes to help me. I would be looking at the circumstance. But Paul looks deeper than the circumstance. He says, pray for strength from the power of God's Spirit. And I think we often look to change the external before we look to change the internal. Discouragement, where does it come from? I mean, we've already covered that. It comes from our inner being becoming worn down. So the solution is to seek God to strengthen our inner being. That makes sense, right? Pray that the Spirit of God strengthens you in your inner being. Be strengthened out of God's glorious riches through His Holy Spirit. And if we're only looking to change the circumstance, then we're only going to be discouraged by the next difficult circumstance. What we need is to be strengthened in our inner being. Jesus even said, in the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Thirdly, we see in this prayer, allow Christ to dwell in your heart. And that word dwell means settle down as a permanent resident. Not just coming and going. Like, hey, I was in big trouble, I needed help, so I called out to God, and now I'm just back to regular life, and I'm kind of ignoring and doing my own thing, and then something else comes up, and I go and I need God, and then I'm back to regular living. He's saying, pray and let God, let Christ be a permanent resident in your heart. Someone who's with you continually throughout each and every day, not just someone you run to when you need a quick fix. And I'm not putting anybody down who's run to Christ because their life is out of order and they need some help. That's a great thing too. But Paul is saying, keep growing and keep going. Don't just rely on God when you need to. Let Him be a permanent resident in your heart and in your life. Every day seeking Him in His Word. Every day seeking Him in prayer. Every day making decisions to bring Him glory. Not just when you need Him. Let Him be that permanent resident. Allow Christ into every area of your heart and life. And then fourthly, remember who you are. Remember who you are. When you're struggling, when you're discouraged, and you want to reach for the glory of God instead of your discouragement, remember who you are. You are rooted and established in love, he said in verse 17b, the second half of that verse, through verse 19. Rooted and established in love. Deep roots, strongly fixed, established, a firm foundation. On what? As Christians, followers of Jesus, our roots are rooted in love. Our life is built on the foundation of love. Love is our core guiding principle. Not success, not wealth, not your abilities, not your achievements or reputation. Love is the measure of our success. In 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3, Paul says this, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but I do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If you hang around after church, you'll hear some of the kids smashing on some gongs and cymbals over here. It's not a pleasant sound, right? He said, I could be something great, but if I don't love, it's just a bunch of noise. Verse 2, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge and have faith so that I can move mountains, but if I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, give my body over to hardships that I might boast, if I do not have love, I gain nothing. Without love, it's all just noise. When Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? In Luke 10:27, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. When we're discouraged, remember who we are. We are rooted and established in love. And you may feel discouragement due to loss. You may feel discouragement due to failure. Due to a number of things, you may feel that inner weariness, but those things do not make you who you are. It's your choice to follow Jesus. It's your choice to love or not to love that really defines the measure of our success. That's why I'm so grateful that a few verses later, Paul says, and love never fails. Our strength will fail. Our plans eventually will fail. All things will come to an end. But love never fails. Where there is great hardship, there is even greater opportunity to love. When things are going poorly, that gives us a great opportunity to just pour out our hearts selflessly in love. I was reminded of my wife's grandfather. Avelino was his name. He was a war hero from the Philippines, Navy veteran from the Philippines during World War II. He has great war stories, very strong man. He's passed away at this point. Moved to the United States, became an engineer. And when it was around Thanksgiving, before we were even married, and I went there on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving to meet him and meet his wife, who at that point in her life, her mental faculties had been failing her. She was forgetting people's names in the family and things like that. And physically, she had grown quite weak and was in a wheelchair. And they had hired help for certain things that Avelino couldn't accomplish, my wife's grandfather. But I saw and heard him talking about her and just how beautiful she is and how she's his best friend and how she's been such a great companion throughout his entire life. I saw him talking to her as she was in her wheelchair at the table. He would turn and they'd have little discussions, and he would talk and rub her on the shoulder and just show love and tenderness to her. The next day I came a little early, and it was Thanksgiving Day, and I saw him take off some socks and put on these thicker socks to make sure her feet were warm. And then he gets out this little bag and unzips it and takes out her makeup kit, starts putting her makeup on. Wow, that's love. When achievements are over, the war stories are history, strength is fading, what do they have left? They have love. And they can have love still in abundance and love still strong. Why is that? It's because it's who we are. We're rooted and grounded in love. Love is our foundation, Paul says, but I would add to that, love is also our final frontier. When everything else is taken from us, what can we still have? Love for God, love for one another. Life challenges that choice constantly, doesn't it? It's like we're born to love God. We're born to love one another. We're rooted and established in love, and life just throws attack after attack to try to get us to back off of that love, to challenge that love. So today, remember who you are and be encouraged that no matter what happens, I am rooted and established in love, and I will choose to love. And the Bible teaches that even when everything else fails, love never fails. Can you say amen to that?
Amen.
He also says you're powerful together as the church. Together, right here in this humble sanctuary, we're powerful together. He says, together with the Lord's holy people, grasp how wide, how long, how deep is the love of Christ, and know that this is the love that surpasses all knowledge. You may be filled with the measure of the fullness of God. It's important that we keep together, Paul says. There's strength together. Remember who you are, rooted and grounded in love, and you're powerful together. And then thirdly, let's look at God's ability. Verses 20 through 21 of chapter 3. We talked about our approach, some application to that approach, and now we want to look at God's ability. Verses 20 and 21 say this. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Through all generations, forever and ever. God is able when we are not. God is able when we are not. Verse 19 of Matthew, chapter 19, verse 26 says, with man it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. In Philippians chapter 2, or 4, verses 12 and 13, you may have heard verse 13 a whole bunch of times. I can do all things, how's the rest of that go? Through Christ who strengthens me. Do you know the context of that? Does that mean I can lift that piano with my pinky because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me? It could be a miracle. But let's look at the context. In verse 12, I'll read it for you. Right before he says that, he says this. Paul says, I know how to be in need. I know how to have plenty. I have learned the secret to being content in every situation. Whether I'm well fed or whether I've gone hungry. Whether I'm living in plenty or whether I'm living in poverty. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Whether I've lost my freedom and I'm in prison, whether I've been taken away from the people I love. Paul's talking about all the challenging seasons of life. And in that context, he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's better than picking up a piano with your pinky. It's saying no matter how hard life challenges you, no matter how much it feels like the wheels are falling off of this ride, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. When I have a lot, I can celebrate the goodness of God. When I'm hungry and I'm impoverished, I can depend on God. I can do it. I can get through it. I will be victorious because it's Christ at work in me. Yeah. A great and powerful truth that God is able when we are not. When we feel like we don't have what it takes. Our task is just to take the next step of faith and see what God will do. God will do something beyond what we can do. In Matthew 14, about 20,000 people, it says 5,000 men, not including the women and children, they were hungry. They brought a boy's lunch, five pieces of bread and 2 fish, a couple of fish sticks in there. How many of you still eat the fish sticks? Jay, you a fish stick guy? No. What's that among 20,000 people? But he gave it. And God is able when we are not. Fed everybody, right? In that same chapter, Matthew chapter 14, we can't walk on water. Yet Jesus said, come to me. And Peter stepped out and walked on the water because God is able when we are not. I was reminded of Joshua chapter 6 when they had these huge walls of Jericho. They had to attack and they marched around and then they shouted praise and blew the trumpets and God brought the walls down supernaturally because God is able when we are not. I know I've shared that story when I held that 1-year-old who was unconscious and not breathing in my hands and I called out to God and his life immediately was restored. It was unbelievable because God is able when we are not. Do your part in faith, and God will do, according to what we just read, immeasurably more than you could ask or even imagine. The word do is poieo in Greek, and it means to manufacture. It points to a hands-on, proactive approach of God, that he can manufacture things that we cannot. Immeasurably more. 2 words we read in English, but in Greek it's actually the same word twice in a row. It's hooper. Hooper is the word. And hooper means benefits that reach beyond the present situation. They are infinite. Hooper. He's saying God is able to manufacture or do infinity times infinity more than we can ask or imagine. We just keep walking by faith. Don't let discouragement get the best of you. Remember who you are and keep going. Infinity times infinity. When I was a kid, I was with my best friend Josh Smith. I actually just text messaged him before the service here because we were talking. And he's in Southern California, but we grew up together in upstate New York, and we were at his house, and it's kind of a relationship that his mom could yell at him as if it was her own kid, and his mom could yell at me like I was her own kid, right? Because we had a close relationship. And my mom said, when do you boys take out the trash? And I was quick on it. I said, not it. When you guys still resolve your problems like that. Not it. Not it is what I'm saying. Not it. Like I don't have to do it. And my friend Josh Smith said, not it times 10. Why did he pick 10? There are a lot bigger numbers than 10. So you know what I came up with? Not it times infinity. Boom. He's taking out the trash. You know what he said? Not it times infinity times infinity. I told him there's no such thing. Infinity is everything. You can't have infinity times infinity. It's the same as my infinity, which I had first. Right? Infinity plus 1. What's the difference? It's already infinity. That day he won the argument. He said, I said infinity times infinity. Matt, you're taking out the trash. So I took out the trash. You know what? Biblically, now we found out he was right. Because in the Bible, Paul says infinity times infinity. So it is a thing. So next time you don't want to be it, Ben, what should you call? Infinity times infinity. Just go right to it. But God can do so much more than we can ask. So much more than we can imagine. God is working from the perspective of eternity. He is doing things that are far bigger than we can even see. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9 says this, and let this sink in as I read it. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no human mind has conceived the things that God has prepared for those who love Him. Great things are ahead. Be encouraged today You have an incredibly bright future, and nobody can take that away from you. God has prepared things far greater than we could even imagine. Romans chapter 8, verse 18 says this, I consider that our present sufferings, and Paul had suffered great things, are not worth even comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Glory lies ahead. God's glory is to be seen through all generations, and that includes us. We read that in the text. This is God's glory for all generations. The greatness of God has not stopped. He still desires to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine in our lives and through our lives. We could have the worship team come forward, and we can have the guys start preparing the handout elements. We're going to share in communion. I want to encourage you, if you're new here, you are completely invited to take communion if you so choose. Jesus said, do this as often as you like in remembrance of me. The Apostle Paul says, take communion in a respectful manner. And that's all we ask. If you're here and you say, God, thank you. Maybe your life hasn't gone well to this point. Maybe you've been in rebellion to God. You're still invited to share communion with us. We'll take that in just a moment. But in light of all that God has done, in light of the fact that God is able to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine, let us approach God. Right? Approach God with freedom. Approach God with confidence. Don't be discouraged. I'll get some later, thanks. Don't be discouraged or worn down internally. Instead, look to the glory that lies beyond the suffering. Even the glory that can be shown through the suffering. I would encourage you, if you're worn down, kneel before God today. Say, God, fill my heart with power from your Spirit. Lord, I want you to be in every area of my life. And remember who you are. Rooted and established in love. Love is our foundation. Love will be our final frontier. Do everything out of love. And never sell God's ability short. God is doing things far too wonderful for us. Do your part in faith. And then just watch as God does immeasurably more than you could ask for or imagine. As they pass the elements, just hold on to the bread, hold on to the cup. We'll partake of them together here. The worship team will just lead us in a song. And if you're able to stand, please stand and let's worship together. And we'll close by partaking of the elements here in a few moments.